Services Board meeting to order. Confirmation of the agenda. Do I have a mover for the agenda? Rick moves, Kathy seconds. All those in favor? Carried. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? None noted. We have the minutes from the October 8th meeting. Is there a board member that would wish to move those minutes? Kathy moves them. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Rick seconds. Are there any questions or any follow-up to those minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes? The one thing I did want to follow up with is the board was going to come back with some suggestions about the money that has been received as a part of the decriminalization of cannabis. The money that we had, I believe it was $10,000 that we received. And I think there was going to be some kind of back and forth with the OPP as to relates to where we would see that money being utilized. Right now, it's not been utilized at all, and has not been used. So I guess the question is that I think the board was going to provide some direction about where we would like to use that money somehow, and maybe some support from the OPP as to determine what may be available to do. I don't know if the board has thought of that, or I just know that that was something that had been in the minutes, but we didn't really hadn't really come back to it yet. So I just wanted to follow up as to the board as to that those thoughts. And if there isn't, then I'll just make sure that we put it on for the next Police Services Board meeting and have a rankful discussion about where we see that money and what we could use it for.
Yeah, my apologies, there's just been a whole lot of moving parts in my world right now.
Yep.
So that money, Mr. Chair, how long is that, do you have to utilize that funding or that?
I don't recall that there was actually a timeline or a specific date of when you had to use it. The concern of the treasurer of the municipality was we haven't allocated anything to anything, and obviously at the end of the day, it's gonna sit there until we to figure out where we spend it. There hasn't been anything indicated to me that you have until December 31st to spend it.
Okay.
Every municipality got it the minute that the federal government and the provincial government decriminalized marijuana, so
Right.
or cannabis. So at the end of the day, I don't think there has been any regulations. Carson, are you aware of anything?
Through you, Chair. So there is no timeline of when it needs to be spent. We got the money that we were entitled to during the first payment, but since we've opted out, we don't receive any of the future payment.
Right.
But also worth noting is when the board is looking to potential uses of those funds, there are set uses of how the money can be spent, whether that be increased enforcement, increased response to public inquiries, increased paramedic services, increased fire services, and bylaw policy development. Those are kind of what is suggested in the Ontario Cannabis Legalization Implementation Fund parameters that we received.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, enforcement's enforcement, right? Like it's, usually drug enforcement is a proactive effort driven through intelligence or it's just discovered upon what we do as far as the enforcement side. Realistically, that all comes as a service to the community of what we do as officers. I know in some areas, and we don't, and I apologize if it's here, but we've had many, Dave, please jump in, areas where there's been certainly, is it a case where like certain bylaws, like you're smoking, those things through the health department, where you could probably see some more localized enforcement, for the, smoking, health, that type of thing, I'm just suggesting. But more importantly, and it doesn't really speak to it, but certainly the education component, which I think the public health, the local public health would be, would that be Huron Public Health, or what is it? Huron County. I think, and we'll talk to Joanna Van Merlo, our mobilization officer, and just see what maybe she has, based on the parameters, but I don't know, Carson, I know there's things like.
Carson?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so that is similar to what is a permitted use of the funds would be under increased enforcement. It also speaks to public health and bylaw enforcement too, which would be your local enforcement too, right? So whether that's dedicating more hours to your bylaw enforcement officer to deal with things locally, right? Or implementing bylaws that either the bylaw enforcement officer or the OPP could enforce.
But if you looked at, you represent the municipality, $10,000 wouldn't really count for much in a salary to enhance any type of position in my view anyway. I think, and again, a suggestion to you, Mr. Chair, was I think we could probably, assist in speaking with the health department. I think the health department, they have very long farm, as you probably know, reaching tentacles when it comes to that, and I'm sure if it meant, enhancing not only the marijuana side, maybe there's a gap in there where it could be also, if it's not specific, obviously marijuana, but perhaps even leveraged a bit towards opioid or that, looking at, and I don't know yet, as far as many areas it helps support something like, say, a needle drop area, safe needle drop. All that translates into, drug education and prevention and public safety, right? So that's why I think that the health department would just be a phenomenal resource to assist you in looking at that. So we'll reach out to Joanna Van Merle, who's our community. She's got all kinds of contacts within health and in our services, and just see, she might have a great idea right off the top that might apply to that. So leave it with us and we'll report back.
Yep.
To the next meeting. And certainly,
Yeah.
the board's decision is obviously, how you go.
Kathy?
I was just curious how it would benefit our local fire department as well. Like, what would they be able to use it for?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I couldn't speak to specifics at this time. It's going to look different for every municipality, right? So, and how it, the impacts of cannabis legalization in every municipality and what they're using it for. That's just high level parameters of what it might look like. So whether fire, I wouldn't have a specific for how it relates to North Huron, but if you go to a different municipality, they might have something obvious based on how they're structured.
It might be also too, because of there was definitely legislation as opposed to having stores about what you actually needed within your store as it relates to fire and suppression and a whole bunch of other things. So my thinking is that, they pigeonholed this first drop as every municipality, whether you opted in or opted out. But even if you opted in, that money you were getting after that is still related to this same thing. So even though you opt out, we're not gonna have some of those other criteria like stores or anything like that. Like our bylaw enforcement really will not be a whole lot different, because at the end of the day, we don't have anything other than recreationally, and they can smoke no different than a cigarette. So the issue is that has the actual municipality's bylaws been changed all that much? No, they have not at this point. So, my concern is that the treasurer is just saying, well, what are we spending this money on? And if we come up with something like public health or whatever, then we need to help, initiate the discussion and move the money, as opposed to this not knowing what we're gonna do with it, and it just sits there forever and a day. And believe you me, I think, I think the municipality and the Wingham Ward would love to just say, just put it to the contract, but is that really the best benefit of that money? No, absolutely not. So I think, the discussion that the OPP have had with, maybe getting public health involved, us having a conversation, but even the municipality having a conversation about bylaw enforcement. The municipality has a bylaw enforcement officer that's on contract, so they're not an employee. So we could hire him to do specific extra work, and that money would be used for that. What I'm hearing from the treasurer is, let's get a bunch of information together, and then between the board and the municipality, let's make a decision that's in the best nature of what this money's used for.
Right, and through you, Mr. Chair, I think if you look at the aspect of, and everybody thinks marijuana, but you have the edible side of it too. You have the vaping side of it too. You have that, the vape, CDSA, all that sort of finds its way into communities. You've got the health associated with the vaping, that's pretty high attention in the media right now. And just, I certainly would never speak for fire, but if you look at the legalization of cannabis, then you also look at people growing their marijuana inside. And yes, there are restrictions and things, but some of that also presents potential fire hazards and things like that that would impact certainly the fire department and perhaps public education through fire prevention. And the other things that I talked about certainly would overlap anything that emergency services would respond to in relation to things like, edible overdose, those things that are very commonplace even in the county, in most places in Ontario right now, because it is new. So I think if you look at, the enforcement side is always great, but you can't enforce and arrest your way out of problems because it's pretty paramount. The police have been doing this for hundreds of years. So I think, looking more to a focus of an education side of it is certainly would probably be more beneficial to the community, targeting the youth, targeting, through the schools, maybe through the school officer program, the development of, resources, handouts, used to, using that money to buy the appropriate education resources. And that's where I think the health department with our school officer, Joanna, and, certainly input from the fire department, they may have maybe allocated little, have that discussion with your local fire chief to say, what are your thoughts on this? And then you can allocate it kind of equitably, so that you kind of hit as much as you can, keep it in mind. It's not a lot of money, but it is a lot if you look at an education component, right? And again, does it all have to be done this year, right? If you've just committed to doing this on a 5-year plan or whatever that may be as far as it goes that way. But I'll speak to Joanna, Dave and I will have that discussion. And Joanna's engaged with public health and our schools, so we'll just see what maybe their thoughts are and how it will look. Because we deliver school programs, we do all this anyway, but maybe there's education pieces. Maybe it's maybe some that could be put towards like a public speaker at your local school that would come in and speak to this at that level of, it's not a police officer. I mean, there's a lot of things, like, like if you look at that education piece, right? Is it somebody that can come and educate your local bylaw, fire or an awareness piece on a public forum that you can invite the community to and utilize some of that money to finance that, right? So there's I think if you just, my own thought would be try to think of that community engagement and education component, and I think that's the end game, because that's what, what are the dangers all, so we don't go in and deliver programs, don't do drugs like we did, 15 years ago. If you're going to, this is possibly the consequence that you're gonna face, or the health issue. Okay, it's your decision, right? So I'll just leave that with the board.
Yep.
And, we'll provide some feedback and
Yep.
Move forward.
So if the board could come to think about that and get some thoughts, and we'll come back to that next meeting, and before then, I will also get some municipality, the council, kind of the council packet, or part of it, and the senior management staff through Carson to kind of give us some maybe thoughts of where they think it might be beneficial to. And we'll put our heads together and kind of make a round decision about where we think this money would be best used, okay? Okay, is there anything else on that? I know that was a longer conversation than we anticipated, but I know that hadn't been discussed after when we had mentioned it, so I didn't want to make sure we get back on the table, so. We'll move on to the detachment commander's report.
All right. So, just looking at the report, and obviously, most appropriate, you're looking at your October numbers, your year-to-date numbers, your year-over-year are not necessarily accurate whatsoever, given the fact that we're new to the contract. So, again, October, nothing really remarkable, nothing out of line with what I would expect to be normal for the time of year. 3 assaults, crime against person, 1, total of 4. Your year-to-date, again, your assault calls are the highest out of the violent crimes at 14. Other crimes against person at 8. Moving into property crimes, a couple of thefts under, fraud, mischiefs. Again, not out of the ordinary from what we would expect in any municipality. The numbers, again, not remarkably high by any means. Moving into drug crime, 1 possession, 1 trafficking charge, and then you see your year-to-date, 3 possession, 4 trafficking. I know our community street crime unit is very active in pursuing things in the north end of the county and within Wingham proper. So we do have ongoing investigations that would address drug crime and related offenses to that. So again, the numbers of your clearance rate on your next page would be skewed based on the fact of year over year. So I won't get into detail with that, but I can tell you that our clearance rates are in line across the board year over year with Huron County as a whole. So I would expect those numbers to start to reflect a proper value as we move into the next year. So, and again, I won't go into the criminal records or any of that. Pending any questions on those numbers, we can move over to the traffic stats on the next page. And ultimately, the most important, you'd be looking at your October 2019 stats, that column alone. Traffic complaints at 9, your rides at 3. We're finding that a couple of the numbers are coming back low. I know the members are up doing the rides, and we'll have the initiative kicking off shortly for the festive ride. So I'm trying to smooth out how, the discrepancy with the number there. They appear to be low across the board, but I know the members are out doing these, so there might be something when it comes to the stats collection that I'm running into a bit of a roadblock with. Your reportable motor vehicle collisions just at 2 on the month. Total UCR violations at 12.
The thing I just like to point out, when you see things like traffic complaint, those things, I look at that, that's where the community's calling us. That's how that gets measured.
Exactly.
So I can't say enough that, if, it's on many signs, many slogans. If you see something, say something, call our 1-800 number and report it. You may, depending on the priority of it, officers may not attend for some time, just be given the priority of the call, but unless we know, like if somebody's, flowers are kicked over or pulled out, it's good that we know, even if it's reported through our civilian data entry or something like that. So it's really important to know, because then we get a better sense of the trends. And I find that in many, certainly new amalgamations, and we still, historically for long-term contract locations, there's still reluctance, especially in many smaller communities, which police, that reluctance to call the police because people just feel, well, I don't want to bother anybody. and it's not a bother, that's what the municipalities, have us here to do, and, to report on. And so, it's, sometimes that little piece of the puzzle, connects a whole lot of things. And so, I would encourage people that if you see something, or if they're a victim of something, to report it. There may not be a conclusion beyond that, but at least it's been reported, and it gives a better sense of what is going on in the community from a crime sort of perspective. So I'll see what
I can add just a little bit to what the inspector said there. Obviously, they may find it trivial, but to us, it may be a key portion as to track back. And we may already have somebody responsible, right? So no matter how trivial, by all means, call us. And just on that note, I'm actually just speaking to one of the former Wingham members that is now with us, just to get his take and how he feels about how things have progressed and how things are going. And one of the key things he felt was that the calls have dropped since we've come into play in February. So, and that's just one member's perspective, but I just want to get a feel for how he was viewing what's been going on. And that was the first thing that came to his mind, was he thinks the call volume may be down a bit from what he would have expected previously. And as the inspector said, it may be that, we're kind of new to the game here with the public. They may think it's trivial, they may not think it's important, but we can only encourage them to call. So, and no matter how small or trivial they may think it might be.
And it's a huge change in process, right? We call them, and that's a huge culture shift for the community, and we understand that. So, certainly, we probably need to really be putting that out there maybe a little bit more as to when we do, but through our media releases. But there's our contact numbers. Here's how you reach us. So, and again, that's just a sense. It's usually a pretty good indicator. We have officers that have worked here for many years, and the numbers are numbers, but experience is experience too. So.
Moving into the media releases for the month, nothing really remarkable. I know that media releases are now coming out via email. Mr. Chair, if you're getting those,
Absolutely.
you're starting
Every day.
bing, 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 your phone won't leave you alone anymore.
Every day.
So you have an overview of what the months may have entailed,
The
but
board also does, because I try to, when I
Forward
once I go in for them, because they do tend to grow on the email if they.
absolutely. But for your awareness and to know what's going on and what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and not necessarily just here, but what our officers are involved with. So, and that's why I actually included, you may ask why this isn't included in the report here, something that's occurring in South Huron, but a major investigation that had been ongoing down there with regards to missing person, and now we've ruled out foul play. The investigation's ongoing. I don't know what you may have heard about the story, but we're just waiting back on the DNA confirmation for the deceased person. But other than that, we are confident that, obviously, as you can see by the headline, foul play has been ruled out. So just waiting on that final piece to close that matter. So we had a lot of resources there. We had from search members, our emergency response team, to helicopter, K9, all of those involved in a very big operation with regards to this investigation. So, like I said, we're just waiting on the last piece. The one thing that's not on the report here, and I'd just like to just mention it, it just occurred last week. We did have a dog bite incident up here in Wingham, where it was an American Terrier. It's a version of a pit bull, is my understanding. I'm not really a dog guy, but that's what it came back to.
It's still under investigation, so.
Exactly. I won't go into too many details, but we did have 3 young persons that were injured. The investigation's ongoing. The dog's been quarantined, and we're dealing with that with the assistance of bylaw and the members up here that have been working on it. So, okay. I'm sure there'll be more to report in the next meeting.
And I'm sure the municipality will have part of that during the bylaw enforcement report they get as well.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm sure they'll get that, that portion back to them as well, so. And again, not that it's, the basis for, the contract, but the calls for service billing summary report, again, there, just as an awareness piece. This document will probably be, modified to meet the needs of the board. Again, this is just a nice to know at this point of where we stand with regards to the calls for service and how they would be billed, based on the weighted hours, which is a normal contract procedure, not we're the transition contract that we're currently in here. And then the last page is the contract hours. I did have some correspondence back and forth with you, Mr. Chair, with regards to that.
Yep.
So, these are the numbers as we have them right now. You can see in September, October, we've kind of dropped off with the reported hours. And a bit of a growing pain. We're trying to sort out the best way that these numbers are being captured. And I'm trying to ensure that the focus and the scope of that is directed to the hours that we're supposed to be looking at, as opposed to something that might be all-encompassing or something that's overarching, if you will. So, Inspector, unless you want to...
Yeah, one of the things that I believe I commented before is, I asked, and I think it's important that because data overlaps, I wanted to get a fresh accounting of what was here, so that we could be accountable to the board of the municipality. One of the things that Dave and I sort of discovered, Dave through his work there, is that, and this is often a growing pain, when you have everything in an amalgamation. I've seen it before, I've lived it before, where sometimes the way in which the data is collected and the way it's entered. So what you have to understand is there are 8 officers came over, 8 from the room? 7? So 7. So now you have 7 new officers that are still predominantly working in this area, and so this entry process is new to them. So that's, data entry is usually, as they say, I can't really say it here, but when data's not good going in, data's not good coming out. So that's an education piece that we find is a challenge. The other thing is how did they, did it line up with like municipal policing bureau and corporate OBP when it comes out? So although at the end I may sit here and say, yeah, it didn't meet, but I will be endeavoring to try and get this back on track. I don't know if it meets or not yet, but I think it's important that in year 1, we try and work the bugs out, and so when I move forward, then we can address it through education of the officers, what the expectations are, and then, deployment of officers, ensuring that they're doing what they're doing when they're supposed to do it. So, again, Dave and I did find a few things from our end, and we have been since then, and just for the last 2 days, pulling our hair out, making phone calls. So we want to see what the numbers look like. If you were to call, really, we want to see what they are, so that we're all doing this the same, and that everybody's entering the same. Just so that we can, to due diligence on our part, and if at the end it's not meeting, then I can explain why and what we're doing to address it. It may be that everything's fine, but the fact that, Dave's numbers show a drop, and there's a few other things, tells me in the way, and they're always revamping data in our organization, and because of a change in efficiency. So again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but I'm doing this in the best interest of service delivery to the community. So we will keep you posted and updated, and give you hopefully an explanation as to what direction this goes, because I know the importance that is to the board, and it's important to us too.
But one thing, if I might add, in making those phone calls and trying to sort out what exactly is going on at the end of the day with these numbers, I found out that we are not alone. Our regional analyst that collects stats and presents them in their fancy spreadsheets is seeing that there's an issue with the way the numbers are coming out on that end, and they're just simply saying, you know what, it's not making sense. One of the things that we've done to streamline this and just to simplify things, at the end of the spectrum where you have certain calls for service that, say that like a barking dog call or a lower priority call for service, where it doesn't become back to the officer to put in a full report. You know, the dog was barking, I went there, talked to the owner, and the dog's not quiet. Those calls for service are now what happens with them is they come in, the officer deals with them, and then they're cleared off through Aurelia, through our civilian data entry location, so that officer doesn't have to go back and spend their time doing a report about something that's not really, you know what, it's not worth the time for them to sit down and write the report about when they could be doing something proactively. So have they changed the way and they capture those stats and move them across? That's
And
one
what
thought.
happens with that is you get a backlog, right? So that's what they're working through, and we've noticed that, because what it's doing, positive for the municipality or communities, is that it's keeping officers on the road. But what it does at the other end is it impacts, perhaps, you know, your clearance when things are cleared, and then the reporting. So I think it's all for the greater good, but it's just, we're in that state of flux. So certainly, that's all I can say. I'm not a data guy, so.
But anyways, just to end on that note, obviously we're not alone, but we're working to a common goal of making sure we have the most accurate and appropriate data at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So,
And again, I think your comment about the officer saying the call volume is lower, if the occurrence count is call volume, if that's what that is relation, I would suggest that it isn't. Because the call volume that we had over the past year before the OPP came on was about 95 to 105, somewhere in there a month. That's what we were getting. So the volume of the calls may not be, the time in which it takes to remedy the call may be where their thinking is, because at the end of the day, now they're not necessarily just in Wingham, right?
Yeah.
Like they're attending to a call in Wingham, but then their next call may be in Clinton, somewhere else. And again, so when they think about time, or occurrence, they're thinking about the time that they spend in Wingham. Well, prior to a year ago, they were here in Wingham all day, every day. So,
Yeah.
you know, from an occurrence count, I'm not seeing that if occurrence count is calls for service, then I would suggest that they're not here any less. Where I look at it is, and that's exactly where I'm coming is the numbers look odd to me as well, because when you say in 1 month you have 91 occurrences at 882 hours, and you have 91 occurrences in the night, and you have a quarter of the hours, is it just that barking dog incident,
Exactly.
or is it something else? So,
Exactly.
so that's the concern that we have, I think from my perspective, this is my opinion only, I knew there would be growing pains about how this was gonna work out and report. My concern in the first year was, as the chair and a municipal person who lived the public meetings in the theater, is what is people's expectation of the service from the last year? From February to now, have their belief or their thoughts of the service changed from when they were absolutely decimating and thought it was gonna be the worst thing that ever happened? We're not hearing that. I'm not hearing that. The municipality hasn't been hearing that. So, you know, from my perspective, I think it's a win-win. It's just understanding the logistics of where time is being spent and making sure that, you know, we're paying for officers and time that and that's the only thing we know. That's the only thing this board is required to make sure and mention. So that's the part for us. So I completely understand from your perspective about the painfulness of statistics and how they're gathered, because that's my life.
Just, Mr. Chair, just moving forward, I certainly, I've got some ideas that I think present, and I'll probably look at doing that in the new year, as to how our reports look, to give a little more, sense of proactive effort, because I think that's what, in my experience, that's what municipalities have really come to expect. You know, we can look at, different ways of, what type of proactive efforts, calls are calls, right? We, you know, the public drives that, but just for example, like the proactive efforts for the food drive coming up, those type of things, and that's, in my view, very good community value, for what we do, and being part of the community. So, you know, that is, you know, a multitude of things, doing focused enforcement around schools at school time, you know, setting up, you know, speed enforcement in targeted areas that may be of interest to the community. So that's what I look at, that proactive effort, that we can show, what are we doing when we're not on a call for service? And I think that's something that we've been working very hard, you know, here, I know I have in Perth and Huron as well, so. And then, certainly, you know, we'll have some new challenges with the new build and deployment that we'll have to work through as well, so. That's where I certainly will rely upon you for your input on what the community senses and expectations, so. I'm here to sort of work through the bugs and know that if I don't know, I can't, do what I can remedy it, so. Just want you to know, I'm here to help the municipality. It's a big municipality, big county, and so, but I think there's a lot of good things that will come from this.
Question, Jim?
Just a question on that, so how does that proactive time get logged or booked? Like what we see here, I assume
Exactly,
is time that's being used for calls,
exactly.
right?
And,
So,
and
I
sorry, my.
No, so I mean, obviously, if there's not a lot of calls, I mean, that's not a bad thing necessarily, so those hours, you know, would show lower, but, you know, I guess that's the thing, is the municipality wants to know that there's still a presence here.
Exactly.
With the cars are still going up and down the road, that the officers are seeing, and, because I think that's an important thing, right? Like, nobody wants to think there's no law enforcement around. So, in looking at this, I'm assuming we don't really see any of that.
You don't on that report.
Right.
I have one that I utilize and help develop with officers that I think can, enhance that. Things like school patrol, some foot patrol, like, yeah, I know it's difficult these days because of, you know, the dispatching and call, but certainly, you know, walking up and down the street, you know, having some engagement, general patrols, focus patrols, like I say, in areas that, you know, stop sign issues, those various things. We look at, even capturing our auxiliary hours and reporting on those. Although it may be 10 in a month here, when you spread it all out, auxiliaries account for a lot of hours, in what we do. Our participation, if we, you know, not our operational busy, things like parades and those type of things that we've traditionally done. And that's that proactive effort, right? Like, you know, in cases where we've done ATV patrols, where it's been required, that's all proactive, you know. In a smaller, when you look at from a smaller municipality, like the boundaries per se, Wingham, it's just has, in some respects, a slightly different look than you may get in a larger county where, you know, you have a stretch of highway and it's all high speed, or it's just, everything's different. We do things, and Dave is part of it, we've done it here in Huron, where we have like a stop and look campaign that we run, like our provincial initiatives as well that we do. That's proactive, it's being done throughout the year, but that's when you heighten it up, like our seatbelt campaigns, those things, ride, that's another proactive effort. So those are the things I think really add value to, and try to measure it. And the other thing and unfortunately right now you don't have the data to drive it, but moving forward, are what are the trends? Like, what are your trends in property related crimes? What are your trends in violent crimes? Because it may look like a lot, or traffic collisions, but you may find that when you look at the year over year, it may be trending down, it may be more, maybe non-existent. And certainly capturing things like mental health, measurement of mental health, which I can guarantee officers here will be engaged with, 100%, everybody is everywhere. So those are some of the things, and I'm hoping to work with Dave, to get to that point, for the new year, and then start to roll it out to all the boards that we work with. I think it does give a clearer picture, and, but right now, like I said, we've got a lot of things on the go, so that's just, if that's something the board wants, like I say, we can work with, Mr. Chair and provide some examples, and if there's some little changes that you'd like, or something that you'd like to see, then we can work with you to kind of come to what it is that municipalities are looking for, without getting into the old proverbial war and peace police reports that are, we don't want that, I don't think anybody does, it's what, to what value, we can come up with numbers all day long. But
Yeah. No, and that's a great question, Jim,
It is
that
a
you've
great
asked, because again, when we look at this report, we look at the contract level, the contract, we're contract for a number of hours, and the hours are based on call volume. Well, if they're in the town, in the municipality doing proactive work, that's a positive, that I would suggest that,
100%.
you know, the Wingham Police were doing that as well. And I would argue that that wasn't really well communicated to the public either. So, no, I think anything we can communicate from the board to the public, through the municipality, through council, is a win-win in my mind about what this arrangement's gonna look like in the long term, for the municipality, because, you know, we're not going back, like, there's no going back now, so we might as well utilize the information and the structure that we have to get some positives out there, so that people understand that it's not the so-called drive-by service that they're getting. They are getting the service, it's just, when you call, they'll come. If you don't call, they're doing other things that are more proactive to the municipality.
Yeah, one of the things, just not to delay the issue, Mr. Chair, but one of the things we do capture are community mobilization hours, and that usually captures what our officers, like Joanna and other officers are doing in relation to public education, mental health calls, some of those things. It's not perfect, but it does give a really good sense of that other's engagement. Like when it kind of captures when we're sitting at the situation table, or we're out doing mental health calls, that education side of it. So the things we talked about before, like Jamie Stanley's gonna come and assist with the food drive at CKNX from a community service officer perspective with some auxiliaries. And that's community mobilization hours, that's public service. So that, you know, if he's there, if he's able to stay there, that could potentially be 4 hours or whatever it may be, for the hours. And report on the auxiliary hours, it's volunteer hours, but maybe, you know, that certainly is value of volunteers to represent our organization and make events work in the municipality, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay,
Pending any questions, that's,
Is there-
what it's all.
I know there was definitely a decent conversation there. Is there any other questions for the inspector or Staff Sergeant David Cinco? No? So I would take a motion to accept the Dash Commander's report as verbally as presented and written. Jim moves that, and Rick seconds it. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, so we'll move on to the minuscule finance report that we have. The fact that we're not gonna have this very much longer, I hope. Well, we're going to have it until the building gets dealt with, but anyway. So, is there any questions as it relates to the bills and accounts that are on this report? I am seeing none. Do I have a mover to authorize and approve the bills and accounts in the amount of $866.46 for the period of October 4th to November 15th as presented? Rick will move that, and did I see Kathy seconding it? All those in favor? Carried. So we'll move on to correspondence. Now, this correspondence is exactly this, this is actually the quarter, you would have seen the calls for service in the attachment committee report for October. This is the actual, calls for service for July to September that we get, that the municipality gets for the whole, group, which would include, sorry, Carson, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, what we do with these quarterly reports that come through, this is the calls for service for all of North Huron, and basically it's just on the police board agenda for information purposes. Council gets them as well, just to kind of see what we have for calls for service for all of North Huron.
So if there is no questions of that, I would take a motion to have the correspondence ordered, read, and filed. Kathy moves that. Rick seconds. All those in favor? Carried. There's no new business, opportunity for public comment. There is nobody here, which is always a delight. So we have no closed session. So the next meeting of the board is scheduled for December the 17th at 7 o'clock here. And the next OA PSB, so the Ontario Police Service Board Zone 5 meeting is held on the 10th in Orangeville at the Lord Dufferin Center, starting at 9. Is there any board member? Carson, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I've also attached with that on your agenda packages, you'll see the minutes of the previous meeting because we didn't have anyone in attendance, so I thought I'd include those as well. And then also the agenda has been sent out for what the next meeting is going to look like, so you'll see that attached there as well.
So if anybody, if there's anybody in the board who could let myself or Carson know whether you're able to attend that meeting on the 10th in Orangeville, that would be greatly appreciated. I'll do my best to try to go to that, but my employment tends to get really grumpy if I continue to take days off. So if there is no further business for the North Huron Police Service Board, I would call the meeting adjourned at 7:47. Do I have a mover? Jim moves it. Rick seconds. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much.